All right, let's start with our invocation verse. Asato ma satgamaya, asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma mritam gamaya, mrityorma mritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So the invocation chant is an opportunity to invoke the divine. We do this before we start any practice, not just for this class, but if we can make this a habit of invoking the grace of the divine before we meditate, before we study, before we do anything auspicious, and we want to move from a place of darkness to light, and from death to immortality. So that's the goal here. Okay, so welcome back after a week hiatus. I wanted to maybe start the class by just opening up the floor, and in the last 2 weeks, things we haven't had a chance to meet, any thoughts or questions about what we've covered so far, any doubts about anything that we've covered. If not, we can continue where we left off. So we stopped at, before we begin, I want to prostrate to all the gurus, and especially my own guru, who has helped me in my path, and all the gurus who have helped anyone in this path, this infinite guru principle that exists. Okay, so we stopped at verse 27, and we were getting into the different kinds of samadhis that is possible for us, and the different methods that exist to experience these different samadhis. And one thing to remember about samadhi is that it is a mind state. It is a very important mind state, but it is a mind state. We need to be able to experience samadhi to be able to understand with clarity, with full clarity, what our experience of ourself is. We are experiencing the self all the time, but thoughts and desires and feelings and judgments, all these things come in the way, and until we have an experience free from those thoughts and desires and judgments and all the things that cloud us, it is very difficult for the mind to able to grasp our real nature and our essential nature, and which is why the practice of yoga is prescribed. And all practices of yoga are essentially trying to mitigate or trying to exhaust the vasanas and the desires and all of our clouds in our vision. And once those are removed, what we experience is that the term we use to describe that is samadhi, where the mind is still. And you can start by using a gross object as a meditation device. And as you kind of get deeper and deeper and your mind gets quieter and quieter, we can change the object to a more subtler form. So we start with maybe a physical object, maybe like a rosary bead, maybe like a form of the divine, based on your culture. But as your mind gets quieter, we can move from a grosser object and move it to a more subtler object. So a sound is subtler than a physical object. And that's kind of where I think we left off. So we're moving from a gross to subtle, and finally we want to even drop that. We want to drop even the subtlest object possible, which is, the idea of the self. So we can use the Upanishads, we can use words that can take us to a place, which is, a thought about the self is the subtlest form and a subtlest tool that we can use. But in the end, even that has to be dropped. So we were talking about two kinds of samadhi, savikalpa samadhi and nirvikalpa samadhi. Savikalpa samadhi is samadhi with vikalpas, which means samadhis with thoughts and or you can say objects. So we want to move from savikalpa samadhi into nirvikalpa samadhi, and nirvikalpa samadhi cannot be practiced. It's something that just happens. All we can practice is savikalpa samadhi. All right, so that's where we were, and we're going to continue down the different kinds of samadhis here. All right, let's do the next verse, 28. Akhandaika sakasakarar samvastu Satchidananda lakshanam ityavichinna chinteyam samadhir madhyamo bhave. So the entity which is always of the same nature and unlimited by time, space, etc., and which is characterized by existence, consciousness, bliss, is verily Brahman. Such uninterrupted reflection is called the intermediate absorption. That is the savikalpa samadhi associated with sound object. Okay, so here we are again given a new kind of, you can say, a tool or a process, which is the mind is essentially reflecting on the essence of the teachings and the essence of the Upanishads, which is, what is my real nature? Remember in the past, we spoke about there's two kinds of, I would say, tools that we use in this work. One is the process of negation, where I say, I am not my mind, I'm not my body, I'm not my intellect, right? I am that which sees it. And so we start with the process of removing everything that we are not. And then what happens is there's a doubt, which is, okay, I've removed everything, and then, nothing is left. Like, then what am I? Am I a nothing? And then we come to the second part, which is the assertion versus, which is, I assert my nature, which is, I am existence, I am consciousness, I am bliss, I'm a conscious being. Like, so these are the assertion verses which move us from the external objects of this world and external things that we experience and move us to that which experiences it all. And then we start to notice what the nature of that is. The nature of that is existence, consciousness, bliss. So the word we use is Satchidananda is kind of a very common way we explain our nature. And this is Brahman. So Brahman is, again, a word that we use to describe ultimate consciousness, ultimate reality. And this ultimate reality is not separate from you. You are not a part of it. You are the totality of it. And these words can help us as in effect, like they are pointers. So they can point us in a particular direction. And so we want to use these words to settle in the place where they take us. So, that's what they're talking about. The uninterrupted reflection is called the intermediate absorption. So you're absorbed in these ideas, and you're absorbed in the feeling, actually, not even the idea. So when I say, you are a conscious being, and if you can just settle on that idea that, yes, I am, the presence of that fact that I am, and just settle and rest there without focusing on like other stuff, like thoughts may be coming and, you may be getting distracted, but you keep bringing ourselves back to that. Yes, I am a conscious being, and settling in that place. So that is called an intermediate absorption, because you're moving the mind from a place of activity and you're thinking to a place of stillness. And the reason why it's called intermediate absorption is because you're still thinking about something. And you'd rather be thinking about this than be thinking about, how to make more money in life, right? So that's, you're getting to a place where your mind is getting still. And so that's this practice that is being prescribed, which is using sound, right? Because you're still using words, you're still using the ideas of the Upanishads, and you're using that to still your mind. Any thoughts or questions about this?
So Puneet, is intermediate absorption meditation or savikalpa? I thought we said that was a kind of meditation, or is this a walking around thing?
When you say physically walking around?
Yeah, just going through daily life, not necessarily meditating.
Yeah, so in this case, I would say it is meditation. So you're sitting and closing your eyes,
all right,
and meditating, and you're getting absorbed. You can get absorbed even when you're walking around, but let's put that on the shelf for now.
Probably not.
That's like more gross. You rather be a little bit more conscious when you're doing stuff, right? You don't want to be driving your car and getting absorbed.
That's what I thought. So that makes perfect sense. Thanks.
Yeah, this is a practice of meditation. Good call out. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's do the next one. Oops. Standhi bhavo rasa svada tritiya purvavanmatah etai samadhi bhi shadbhin nayet kalam nirantaram. So the insensibility of the mind to external objects is before, on account of the experience of bliss, is designated as a third kind of samadhi, nirvikalpa. The practitioner should uninterruptedly spend his time or her time in these 6 kinds of samadhi. Okay, so we're finally getting to the last sort of part of the practice, which is not really a practice, it's more of a consequence, which is when the mind lets go of all the objects, which is even the thought of the practice, even the practitioner, everything. The mind kind of slips into this place where it is free from vikalpas, which is it goes into a state of nirvikalpa, which is without vikalpas, without thoughts or perturbations. And in this place, we experience bliss, because what happens is our nature is bliss, and thoughts and ideas and feelings, they are all things that put our attention from the subject to an object. And when the experience goes to the object, we take on the nature of the object itself. So we tend to not experience bliss when you're focusing on thoughts and feelings and people. But when our mind kind of drops away, and when the mind settles in this place of the lack of experience or lack of thought, you can say, the bliss naturally emerges. And this can be proved, which is, when we experience bliss in the world, right? Like think of all the times when you've experienced bliss or happiness, when you've, I don't know, gone on a walk someplace which is super quiet, you've seen a beautiful sunset, you've seen a concert that has moved you, you've spent some time with your friend or your partner, and you've had a blast. In all those moments, what has happened is the mind is no longer paying attention to thoughts. It's just in the now. And because it's in the now, the bliss of the self peeps out in those moments when the mind is free from thinking. And that's the only bliss that we experience. It's just that when we experience it with an external, I would say, object, we tend to attribute the bliss to the object. But actually, what has happened is the bliss of the self has peeped through that experience. Notice this in your own experiences, and prove or disprove it. See that if there is a different bliss that you can experience in different experiences, it is the same bliss that keeps happening, and just maybe the form is slightly different based on the senses that get triggered. But what happens to the mind is the same, where the mind becomes still. Okay, and here we are saying the practitioner should uninterruptedly spend their time in these 6 kinds of samadhis. And what are these 6 kinds of samadhis? There's we started off by saying there's an internal, you can experience, I guess there's like 2 places where we can practice. So this is what you were driving at, Steve, which is you can practice in your meditation seat and you can practice in the world. And we start by practicing in the meditation seat because that's where we can experience, we can at least shut the influences of the world. It is much more difficult to practice in the world. In the beginning, we have to start by practicing in our meditation seat, which is we can shut off our senses by closing our eyes, getting to a quiet place, not having any smells around, not touching anybody. So like all the senses are kind of put in place. The only thing that starts to happen is the mind and the inner equipment starts to function. So thoughts, feelings, desires start to activate when we're sitting down in meditation. So what we do in the first time is we act as the witness. So we are a witness to all my thoughts, all my desires, all my feelings. So that's the first kind of samadhi that we can experience, which is the savikalpa, where all my desires and feelings and thoughts, I'm a witness to them. I am not those thoughts. And then the second type of samadhi that we experience is that we think of ourselves as Satchitananda. I think that was the second kind of samadhi that was introduced in this 3 verses ago, I believe, where we say we are of the nature of consciousness, bliss, and knowledge and existence. Meditate on that. And then the third kind of samadhi is nirvikalpa samadhi, which is we get to a place where there's no thoughts, no feelings, and all we experience is consciousness itself. So that's from the internal standpoint. And then this, then we do the exact same thing when we are walking around in the world, which is when I'm out in the world and I'm experiencing the world with all its people, with all its things, all of the desires that other people have, I experience them in the same way, which is I'm a witness to all those things. That's the first sort of practice from the external standpoint. And then similarly, the second practice is the external world also is Satchitananda, which is it has of the nature of existence, consciousness, and bliss. And then the last one is nirvikalpa samadhi. Both, you can experience nirvikalpa samadhi with your eyes open too. And which actually ends up being sahajya samadhi, which we will not get into here, but it's essentially natural and continuous samadhi, which is there is no inside and there is no outside after a point, where our ability to go to that place is effortless. Like there's no effort involved. It's like if I were to ask you a question of like, are you a human being? Do you have to remember that? You have to struggle to remember that you're a human being every time when you wake up or every time that you're walking around? No, it's obvious. So in the same way that this state becomes so rooted that it's obvious that there is no effort that's needed for the mind to go there. So how do we get there? We need to uninterruptedly spend their time practicing until it gets rooted. So keep practicing until you have doubt. It's more like, a child asking, what does sex feel like, right? Like, will I know when I have an orgasm? Yes, you will know. Like, how will you know? You will just know, right? In the same way, you will know when you're done. It's another example that I think Ramakrishna uses is it's like the doll walking in the ocean, like a doll made of salt merges with the ocean. And it's not like the doll has a idea and it becomes a super doll and becomes a super salted doll. It's that the salt itself melts away, kind of dissolves, and it no longer exists. So the ego is like the doll, where it has all these questions, it has these doubts, has these problems. And it's not like you solve all the problems. It's not like you suddenly become a superhuman or a super person. It's that the doll itself dissolves. So the ego itself goes away. So it's funny because like in the end, we get nothing. We literally get nothing with this work. Our life from a physical standpoint does not change at all. You are the exact same human body, have the same body, same, intellect, same maybe mind, but fundamentally something changes, which is your identity changes. So because your identity changes, everything changes. So it's kind of a paradox where from an external standpoint, somebody can look at you and be like, oh, nothing has changed. But from your inner experience, everything has changed. Okay, any thoughts or questions about this?
Hi, Puneet.
Hey, Simi, how are you?
Hi, good. Thank you. Hope you're doing well too. So I wanted to share something. This is just an observation I had about, no thoughts. I know a lot of, I don't know if I want to call them practitioners. Maybe they do, but maybe they don't. I don't know them that well, but I notice some of them take different type of drugs to kind of get to the place where meditation takes them.
Mm-hmm.
And I like for example, I went to this drum circle and there was a lot of weed, that people take, and it's kind of common in some circles. I noticed that. So for me personally, I haven't tried that, but like this past week, I had a glass of wine, and I don't typically drink that often. So just by drinking that glass of wine, I could notice, like, it's interesting. Like I wouldn't say I was experiencing the way I would experience something in meditation, but the thoughts did stop. I definitely noticed that the thoughts stopped and there was less filter in, it was just a very different experience. I guess I I almost saw like a similarity between the two. And now I'm like, oh, maybe that's why some people do take weed to help them kind of get to that same place, maybe to experience
that. So I've done a fair amount of substance abuse in my life. So I can speak from my own experience, which is drugs and alcohol and stuff. They do have an influence on the mind, right? Like they do, you can say, remove the volume or reduce the volume of thoughts at least, right? Which is what you're talking about, which is like, the filter has been removed. Like, what does it mean to be, to be free in that way? Like, when people like drink, I'm like, I'm a freer, I don't have any inhibitions, I can say what I want. But essentially what's happened is like a part of the mind has been suppressed, right? Like the one that's active and like judging and maybe self-judging, that's kind of like quietened down, which is why people feel great when they drink. It's like, oh, it's Friday, I had a shitty week, I've been judging myself the whole time because my coworkers have been, I don't like my coworkers, right? I don't like my boss, and I've been self-critical. And then Friday comes in and I want to stop that voice, and I drink, and it does work, and it feels great. And then Monday it starts back again, right? So it's definitely has an effect. But then the question is it permanent? And if you're seeking real change, and if you're really serious about it, you will see that it doesn't work. Like it can feel like it works. It feels good while you're doing it, but then there is a cost that's paid. There's always an interest that is charged. Nothing comes for free. And the interest is that, either you need more of it, either it doesn't work as well, or it sometimes frankly causes more damage, right? Unintended consequences, which is, I don't know, maybe you start a fight with somebody while you're drunk, or like maybe you with your own relationship suffer, like whatever, right? Like all the different consequences of not being at your highest conscious state. So that's one aspect, and no judgment here. Like I have no judgment against people who drink or like smoke or like do drugs. I have done them a lot, so I cannot have any judgment here. But the second point is, when you look at it from the Vedantic standpoint, especially drugs, maybe not so much alcohol, drugs give you a reality, or at least present to you a reality that you don't normally see, which is, I may have a connection to something, I may feel one with everything. It may also, you may also hallucinate, right? Which is, I may see beings that appear. All of that could happen. Now, the problem with that is it can be true, or it can be false. But most of the time we tend to think it is true. And now what's happening is you're having a double samsara, you can say, which is you're having an experience of this world in an altered state, which is a different state, which is a different world. So you believe that the world in this altered state is true, whereas this world is not true. Right? So then we tend to like want to go back and say, oh, I want to experience that thing again, because, I had a vision that, the mother was like talking to me in that experience. Right? So now we want to go back to that state again and again. And the problem is that most of the time it's a hallucination. It's very rare that you're going to have a real vision unless you have done this work where, you can tap into that nature without any substance. And, frankly, even that, the potency of that starts to go down, and you'll have to start taking a lot more of a substance. Anyway, getting into a little bit of a side tangent here, but my point is like there's a double samsara going on, which is like you having an image about an image, which is right now I have an experience of this world, which is through my own ideas and thoughts and feelings. And then now I'm having an experience of a different world through this drug, which is, an image about this world. And Vedanta would say, none of those is real. Mm-hmm. Neither this world, neither that world. But I can say that the only benefit that, drugs has had or given me is that it has told me that the world that I believed in while I was sober, or like while I was not in this in intoxicated state, was unreal, or rather it was flexible. Like it had like my reality in this altered state was so different than the reality in my non-altered state that I knew that you can have multiple realities. So that gives you that sort of understanding that, oh, different realities is possible. That's how it personally benefited me. But beyond that, I don't think you can do yoga while you're in an altered state. Like you can definitely have fun, you can definitely enjoy, you can definitely feel calm. But I personally think it doesn't root you. So we are talking about being rooted, right? So we are saying the practitioner should uninterruptedly spend their time. Why? Because you want to get rooted where things need to be effortless. You don't need to be honest, you need to be smoking dope. You don't need to be like doing certain practices even. Like that's the goal that we want to get to, where it's just obvious that you are the self. Like nothing needs to be done. And the interesting part is like once you get more and more, I would say, rooted, the experiences of the drugs will pale in comparison to what you experience a moment to moment. So, we talk about getting high. on a drug, I would say it starts to feel like you're getting low when you smoke up or when you are, drinking, because the highest peak of human consciousness is not through a substance. It is by tapping into what is already there. And substances and these things are only creating clouds. And it's creating a layer of like a thought, or it's creating a layer of ignorance. So you see that like from a sort of a mechanical standpoint, a drug is essentially creating another cloud in your vision. Maybe it's a nice looking cloud, so you enjoy it, but it is a cloud nonetheless. That's my take on it. I'm sure if you ask somebody who is a ayahuasca shaman, they may disagree. But I rather be in a place where I'm not dependent on anything. Of course, there's like herbs and tools and stuff which may be useful from a physical standpoint, but from a subjective standpoint, I want to be free. At least that's my goal.
Thank you, Puneet.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Okay. All right, let's do the next one. Dehabhimane galite vijñate paramatmani yatra yatra mano yati tatra tatra samadhayah. So with the disappearance of the attachment to the body and with the realization of the Supreme Self, to whatever objects the mind is directed, one experiences samadhi. All right, so this is again, we talk about a consequence here, which is when the mind is free from thoughts. And what happens is when it's free from thoughts is essentially all the attachments to the body disappear. And what is the body here? Body doesn't necessarily only mean the physical body. So remember this, we have two kinds of bodies. One is the physical body, and then we have the subtle body, which is the mental body, which is the mind, the emotions, the memories. All of those are also body in yoga. So both those disappear. So all your memories are sort of put away, or at least our attention is not on them, and the physical body also disappears in this state. And in this state, we realize the Supreme Self, which is nothing remains other than consciousness itself. So it's consciousness making contact with consciousness. And in this state, once we are clear of what our nature is, then we realize that there is no inside and there is no outside. So when you say whatever objects exist outside, everything is consciousness. So when you direct your attention to, let's say, a tree that you're looking at, you can experience samadhi because you understand what consciousness is. There is nothing that is not consciousness. There's no place where consciousness is not. So wherever our attention goes, we have the opportunity to experience samadhi because we become you can say we become nirvikalpa essentially, which is we become a thoughtless state at all times. Once we realize what samadhi is, which is why, when we say, there's like different kinds of samadhi, the last kind of samadhi is sahaja samadhi, which is natural and continuous samadhi, where there is no effort involved or no effort needed to know who you are, because you are the self. And once you know that, that's in that state, it is very easy to drop the mind, because the mind is essentially does not exist in the sense that it does right now, whereas it feels concrete and it has a separate existence and it has desires and feelings which must happen. And once we experience this state, this concrete mind kind of dissolves. And of course, the mind comes, you make decisions, you have choices, you have feelings and thoughts about what you experience, but they are not concrete in the sense where they grab us and like they make us feel a certain way because of the insistence of the desire. we become the master of the mind, and the mind essentially can, be enjoyed, you can say. Okay, any thoughts about this one? Okay, but so the goal is to experience samadhi, which is savikalpa samadhi. That's all we can do. So keep going there. So in a practical sense, keep practicing savikalpa samadhi. That's the only practice that we can do. Keep letting go of desires that kind of hold us. They call vasanas, right? So keep letting go of vasanas, keep letting go, and there's going to be a fruitful moment, or like a auspicious moment, when the mind completely goes away and the mind slips into nirvikalpa samadhi. So I would say don't try to seek nirvikalpa samadhi, because that is going to create another vasana. You cannot seek nirvikalpa samadhi. So all you can do is you can practice savikalpa, and nirvikalpa will happen to you in a auspicious moment in your life. Okay, let's do the next one. Vidyate hridaya granthi chidhyante sarva sanshayah kshiyante chasya karmani tasmin drishte paravare. By beholding him who is high and low, the fetters of the heart are broken, all doubts are solved, and all his karmas, activities, and their effects wear away. So him with a capital H is essentially the self. And this is more of a bhakti practice that is being offered. So bhakti yoga is about remembering and chanting the names of the Lord, and maybe going to a temple, or maybe in your own house you have a place where you have maybe a small mini temple in your own home. But the subtler practice is that there is a temple within us, the temple of the divine. Like we are the divine, so we can hold on to that. And what can hold on to that? The mind is holding on to that, right? Like the mind is the only thing that has the problem. So all these practices are essentially for the mind. So having the mind remember, the word, I don't think there's a remembrance here, but the word we are using is vidyate. So you want to hold the mind, and like a baby, right? You're just like holding the self. And when we remember the self, the hridaya granthi, which is the knots of the heart. So there are all these different knots that exist. And these are essentially vasanas, our deep desires, our ignorance, doubts. All of those have these knots, because they're essentially where our attention keeps going over and over and over again. And unless they are broken, unless the knots are released, our attention is going to keep going there and over again. So usually what we try to do is we try to solve our problems. We try to, answer our doubts. We try to satisfy our desires. But if we do them from a place of lack, what's going to happen is that when we satisfy a desire, we're going to have more desires. When we, answer a question, we are going to have more questions. So it doesn't work. So what we can do instead is we can surrender, and we can hold the divine, and we can remember the divine, and say, if we have the capacity for the mind to kind of go there and, stay in that place and rest in that place of awareness, that is the best bhakti that we can do, where we are just resting there and resting in the feet of the Lord. And in that place, thousands of vasanas are burnt. You can say even millions of vasanas are burnt. And the effects of those vasanas wear away. Because what are vasanas. They're essentially deep desires that we have, that I want this to happen, otherwise I'm not going to be happy. But by beholding him and going to that place, we are convincing the mind, or at least we are letting the mind get a taste of bliss without any object. And the mind is starting to get a taste of like, oh, actually, you know what? I don't really need these things that I really want, like have a wrong misunderstanding. And I have all these desires which I want to fulfill. I don't really need them. And because I don't really need them, the insistence of those desires starts to fade. And these effects of the karma start to reduce. And they automatically drop. So these are karmas that we can give away and we can drop because of insight. And of course, there are going to be some karmas which we cannot give away because they're just too strong. So we have to go through them. And when self-realization happens, there's essentially three kinds of karmas, which, going into technical details. There's karmas of the past, karmas of the future, which have yet to happen. And then there's karmas of the present. Thing they call sancheta karma, karmas of the past. Sanchita karma is karmas of the future. Agama karma is karma of the past, and prarabdha karma is karmas of the present. So three karmas. Karmas of the past and karmas of the future are obliterated when self-realization happens, because you realize that I have no desires left anymore. Like nothing more is needed. Nothing more is true, and desires in the sense of insistent desire that this must happen. It's more like you're just flowing with the world. Wherever the world takes you, that's your life now. So that's the sort of, the future karmas are completely gone away. The past karmas, which are like, maybe regrets, all these different things that we have about things that have happened in the past, are ideas about them fall away as well, where you wanted to fix things, you wanted to do something differently, and regrets for the past feelings or whatever, right? Like all of those also kind of go away. Only thing that remains is the prarabdha karma, which is the karmas of the present, which is things that are yet to fructify, but like their actions and the sort of energy of those karmas are already set in motion. So the example we use is like when you fire an arrow, the arrow has left the bow and it's moving. It hasn't reached the target yet, but since it's left the bow, the energy of the arrow is already in motion. So it has to go in the direction that it was set out. And that's kind of what our bodies are doing right now. Or rather, when self-realization happens, when you look at somebody and you're like, oh my God, they're doing all these things, they have all these desires. Well, it's essentially, you can explain them and say that it's prarabdha karma, which is these are just desires that are already set in motion, and they can't help it, but they have to go through those desires. Anyway, so this is getting a little technical, but the point is your own vasanas and your own insistence and your compulsions will wear away. And once those wear away, it becomes immediately easy to access the self, because the self is on all the time. There's no time when the self is not. And the only thing that keeps us from accessing the self is our insistence and compulsiveness on desires and things of the world. Okay, any thoughts about this one? Okay, let's do the next one. Avichinchidabhasa tritiya swapna kalpita vigneya strividho jiva tatradhya paramarthikaha. So there are three conceptions of jiva, consciousness, namely as that limited by prana, etc., as that presented in the mind, and the third one, consciousness as imagined in the dream, to have assumed the form of man, etc. Okay, so here we are sort of talking about the three kinds of ignorance. Again, this is not all the possible reasons why there's ignorance, but a list, one of the many lists that you will see. And jiva here is essentially limited, you can say personhood, which is I feel like I'm a person, where I feel like I'm limited to my body, to my mind, to my personality. That's what jiva is. And here we're just given like a list of like what those three categories are, three kinds of categories. And I believe this book is driving at the first category. And there's other Upanishads and other texts which talk about the jiva as being our mind, or as that being our dream. So we can kind of go into this list. So the first one is what we normally feel, which is like I am my energy, I am my physical body. A lot of people are physical, right? Like we think we are this meat lump. Sometimes I feel high energy, sometimes my body feels low energy. So that's the first sense where I feel very limited by that. So if my body is healthy, I feel pretty good. If my body is sick, I feel down. So that's the first one. The second one is the mind. So in terms of like the personality, in terms of like my intelligence, you can say intelligence from like, a limited standpoint of my intellect, like how much information I have, all the experiences I've had, whether I'm a smart person, whether I'm a silly person, whether I'm funny, whether I'm not funny, all these different ideas that I have about myself. That is another sort of jiva, you can say, a limited identity. And then the last one is consciousness as imagined in a dream, which is I imagine things about who I am. Like maybe I'm an Indian, I'm an American, I believe in socialism, I believe in capitalism. These are all ideas I have imagined. And these identities come in the way in really experiencing the self, because this is where my attention is always directed towards. Somebody says something against, let's say, Republicans, I get all rallied up. Somebody says something against like liberals, I get all rallied up, right? Like that's because my identity is in this imagination. There is no such thing as nations in the end, right? Like there's no such thing as America. We have imagined what America is. We have imagined what India is. So that's like a dream. But we get all riled up because somebody says something against my country or my identity. How could they say that? And everyone lives in this world, right? This is the world we all live in. So this is the third kind of jiva, which is this jiva of imagination. The first two, you can say, has a relative reality, which is I do have a body, I do have, it does fall sick, it does feel high energy, it does feel low energy. Those are all realish experiences. And then the second one about the mind, I feel like I'm smart, I feel like I'm silly, I feel like I can do it. Sometimes I have imposter syndrome, sometimes I don't. All these things are also true experiences. But the last one, which is about identity, it's all imagined. So these are the three forms of like the jiva which come in the way of us realizing the self. And this is not the only three. This is, this is just another list. Upanishads and the yoga, we love coming up with lists. So this is another list for you. Any questions about this one? Okay. Avacheda kalpitaha syadavayachhedyam tu vastavam tasmin jivatvamaropad brahma tattvam tu swabhavataha. So limitation is illusory, but that which appears to be limited is real. The jivahood of the self is due to the superimposition of illusory attributes, but really it has the nature of Brahman. Okay, so here we're talking about what is known as anyonya abhyas. I don't think we have used that word here, but essentially it's mutual superimposition, where I attribute the qualities of the self, which is existence, consciousness, bliss, three of them, Sat Chit Ananda. I attribute these qualities onto stuff which is not the self, onto the not self. So country, right? Like the idea of a nation, I attribute Sat Chit Ananda. Consciousness, which is, it is a real thing. Existence, it exists and it has bliss. Believing in my country has joy-giving properties. That is the superimposition, where I'm imposing the attributes of the self on something external. Think of anything that you value in this world, which is an object. Chances are that you're attributing joy-giving properties to that object, which is, it is blissful. No doubt that it may give you bliss from an experiential standpoint, but if you analyze the experience, all it has done is that it has quietened your mind when you have played with the object. And when you play with it and dance with the objects of this world that you love, the mind quietens down. And when the mind quietens down, the bliss of the self is revealed. So that's the first practice that we are sort of told, or like in the beginning, we are told the practice, because until we have a clear experience of the self, the world is going to keep grabbing at us. So in the beginning, we want to say, okay, I'm not the world, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. I'm creating a sort of separation from me and the world, because the world is the one that has grabbed me and pushed me in different directions and has sort of taken me in different places where I feel very scattered. What we want to do then is like get all the energy in the scattered mind into one single place. Don't worry about the world. The world will be whatever it is. And focus on who you are. Focus on realizing the self. Once you have a clear experience of the self, then we move on to the next question, which is, what is the world? And what is the world is that it is Brahman too. It's like we fooled you and we said that it is not the self, but actually the world is the self too, because the world is nothing but consciousness appearing as the self. The jivahood, as they say, is because of ignorance. We say that the world has joy-giving or misery-producing properties is because of ignorance. But the fact is, the world has no properties at all, in the sense, no real properties. You give them properties. So my experience of the world is very different than your experience of the world. So if we understand that, it's that I have essentially imagined it all in some way. I have imagined that this is joy producing and this is misery producing. It is a firm belief. And I like what Mandukya Upanishad says, which is, they say that the jiva is an attitude. It's like a feeling. I feel like a person. I feel limited. I feel limited because of an idea that comes in my mind. So think about the times when you get triggered. Think about the times when you feel incomplete. In those moments, it's a feeling. You were not feeling that moments before that feeling happened, and you will not feel that moments after the feeling goes away. But it's just happening. It has just appeared, exists for a while, and then it goes away. So, and what we're doing is we create the feeling due to our beliefs, due to our experiences of the past. All of those things, trigger this feeling. If we understand that, it means that we can now separate ourselves, or at least look at it from as a witness and say, oh yes, it is a feeling which has appeared. And why has it appeared? Because of some memory or some experience of the past that I have not assimilated well, or not understood what happened when that experience happened, and had a wrong idea, which has led to me feeling like I am either smart, I am either stupid, I am either like, whatever the feeling is. So we start to so we have this like tightly wound, I would say, like coil around us, which keeps like getting tighter and tighter every time we get triggered, because we are recreating that feeling. We're recreating that idea. What we want to do is we want to unwind by not adding to the energy of that feeling. And when that happens, naturally, the tightness of that coil starts to lessen and lessen and lessen, and over time this coil is gone. So there could be situations where in the past where maybe you were triggered about one thing, and like now you're not, right? A typical example is, maybe you loved your tricycle when you were a kid, and somebody took your tricycle away. You got really annoyed at them. You're like, how can you take my, I don't want to share this. And then over time, something else happened. Your attention on it was no longer true, because you got maybe a bicycle. You're like, who cares about the tricycle anymore? So your attention on the tricycle wasn't there. And over time, that you can say memory, or that like desire, or that vasana kind of automatically got dissolved, because now you have something new to play with. So it's not like you had to say, I don't need the tricycle anymore. I'm consciously going to destroy this desire for the tricycle. You didn't have to do that. It went away naturally. So in the same way, we don't have to destroy all of our like vasanas in a particular way. All we have to do is we have to turn our attention to something higher. The bicycle was higher than the tricycle. Maybe you have a car now, you don't think about the bicycle anymore. But think of now the highest vehicle that exists, which is the vehicle of God. And if we can direct our mind there, which, as the previous verse was saying, then all these like desires are going to naturally go away. And then you start to see that the world is nothing but consciousness. It is me and my mind and my impressions that paint it in a particular way. And this, with the ignorance as the brush, with the ignorance as the brush, the jivahood appears, which is I feel like a person. When this ignorance goes away, the brush is no longer there. So like the possibility of you getting identified becomes zero. Maybe there's like 1% chance where like some of the triggers which are still there come about, but you see them for what they are. My teacher loves the example of the snake and the rope, right? You see the snake for the snake, and you don't go about kissing the snake, because it's like not a real snake. But what we tend to do is we tend to like in the past we tend to like say, how could they do that to me? Don't they know who I am? Have all these like ego-driven thoughts when those triggers happen, not realizing that those follow-up ideas and thoughts actually add to the energy of the thought. So instead of like adding to the energy of the thought, we're going to step back and see the silliness of the fact that we are experiencing this right now. And when we see the silliness of it all, the energy of it drops, and we can kind of move on and go beyond it. Okay. Any thoughts about this one? Okay, let's do one more. Avicchinnasya jivasya purnen brahmaikatam tattvamasya vakyani jagurnaitara jivayo. So such Vedic statements as that thou art, etc., declare the identity of partless Brahman with the jiva, who appears as such from the standpoint of a theory of limitation, but it does not agree with the other two views of jiva. Okay, so there are four, you can say, utterances, or they're called the great utterances, which essentially are the entire teaching of the Vedanta. The first one, I believe, is Tattvamasi, which is that thou art, like you are that. So this, you can imagine the context is, a student or a disciple is with like a teacher, or like somebody who wants to know the truth is like going to the teacher and say, tell me the truth. And then the four statements are occurred. You are that, which is, actually, no, that is not the fourth, that is the third one. So the first one is, wait, let me look this up for Mahavakyas before I butcher them. Yeah, so Prajnanam Brahman is the first one. So you are consciousness. Or rather, actually, let me step back. So Prajnanam Brahma is not you are consciousness. It is Brahman alone is consciousness. So we introduce the word that, everything is Brahman. And so the question is like, what is Brahman? Like, so we say Brahman is consciousness, which is, it is existence. Everything is Brahman. Brahman alone is. And then the second statement is, I am Atma Brahma, which means this self that the teacher is talking, right? So this self is Brahman. So the student is looking at the teacher and saying, oh yes, I know the self in you is Brahman. You are you are a being, a divine being. And then the teacher says, Tattvamasi, you are that, which is you are consciousness. You are Brahman. And then the last one is Aham Brahmasmi, which is I am Brahman. I am the divine. So it's essentially going from talking about the world, talking about the teacher's experience, moving it to the student and saying, what is my experience of the self is the same experience of the self that you are having right now. Right? And then the student can say, I am Brahman, which is Aham Brahmasmi. So we get inspired by a divine person or a divine being or a divine entity and say, oh, wow, look at that. They are so amazing. And then the teacher comes up to them and talks about their experience of the self. And then the student gets familiar with what that means. And then the teacher says, you are that. It's not this I am that, but you are that too. And then the student is like, wow, that is true. And then finally the student has the aha and says, yes, I am Brahman. That's the last sort of realization that happens. So that's the entire teaching of the Vedanta in 4 statements. So coming back to this verse, so the jiva here maps to the student, which is the ignorant fool who thinks they're not the self. And they have all these doubts and questions. And well, they're also like seekers. So they're also like, have a ripe mind who want to learn what the true nature of their self is. So they appear, and then this jiva then realizes that they are nothing but Brahman itself. So the fact that the jiva appeared was in ignorance, because once ignorance is destroyed, the jiva also is destroyed. I don't quite understand what they mean by it does not agree with the other 2 views, but that's not important. But the point being that the jiva is essentially imaginary, you can say. So the framework and the tradition that I come from says that the jiva essentially disappears and gets destroyed, because the jiva was essentially a misunderstanding where I thought a jiva was a real conscious entity. The fact is, it is inert. Jiva is something that appears, exists for a while, and goes away. And what I'm looking for is something that's permanent, something that is still, that does not change, does not rise, or does not fall. Anything that changes cannot be me. And once we have this realization and this direct experience of the self, then the power of the jiva essentially falls. Right now, we may be operating in a mode of like 99% jiva and 1% self. But when the shift happens, it flips, where we operate from 99% self and 1% jiva, where the jiva is needed to be transactional in this world. You need to make decisions, you need to interact with people, you need to like go about doing things that you need to do. But in the background, the self is on, and our contact of the mind with the self is 99%, and 1% is there operating in the world. And this happens once we get rooted, and once we do uninterrupted. What was the phrase? We uninterruptedly practice and get rooted in the self. Any thoughts about this one? Okay, let's do one more. Brahmanyavastita maya vikshepa vritti rupini avritya khandatam tasmin jagat jiva prakalpaye. So Maya, which has the double aspect of projection and concealment, is in Brahman. It limits the indivisible nature of Brahman and makes Brahman appear as the world and the embodied being. So now we're getting back into the cause. Like, we're talking about ignorance, which is jiva, and now we're going back into like, what is Maya? We did talk about like the two powers of Maya in the past, which is it has the power of concealing, which is avarana shakti, which is it blocks my understanding of who I am. And then the second aspect of Maya is the projecting power, which is it projects all sorts of ideas about the self or like about the world, which is untrue. The example we used was like the rope and the snake. I don't know that it's a rope. I imagine it's a snake. So that's the first aspect, the concealment aspect. And the projection aspect is now, because it's a snake, I have to do all sorts of things. I have to like, make sure it doesn't bite me. I make sure there's a hospital close by, make sure I, call my wife before, I die, whatever. All these different things that happen. So those are the two aspects of Maya. Now the question is, where is Maya? Where is the locus of Maya? And sometimes we may have the understanding that, Maya is because of the mind. The locus of Maya is in the mind, because all my false ideas are in the mind. And because of like that, all of my misunderstandings and ignorance exist. Actually, that is not true. Maya is in Brahman. So Brahman and Maya go hand in hand. And then you may have the question, why? Well, that's not a very good question, but this, or rather, we don't know the answer to that. It's like, why does Maya exist? But the point being that the mind is a result of Maya. So people who have realized the self, their mind disappears, but the global Maya, you can say, or like the power of Maya is still there. But for them, it has disappeared because they have essentially realized the self, and they've realized the true nature of Maya too, which is that it has this power of projection, or rather concealment and projection. And this is happening for everybody, and each of us is being affected by Maya. And because of our experiences, our memories, and our past, how we project is different than how I project is very different than how you project, because you have all these different experiences, which is the cause of your experience of the world. But the fact is, Maya is in Brahman. and it is the cause of essentially the world. So you can say, from a tantric standpoint, or from like let's say a Kashmiri Shaivism non-dual standpoint, we talk about the dance of Shiva and Shakti. So Brahman is the sort of masculine aspect of it, and Shakti is the feminine aspect of it. And when both of those meet, there's creation. And this world is essentially a creation, right? Like we are creating thoughts, we're creating ideas. They first manifest as a thought, and let's say I have a thought of like building a house, that it's first in my mind. It's a subtle thought. And then I put in more energy into it, it becomes a real physical, at least real in the sense it becomes more grossified, and it's a real house is created. But the point is that all of creation that's happening is because of the contact of Maya with Brahman. And the world, and that's the world. There's nothing wrong with the world. There's nothing, like there's no judgment here. It's just that the world is essentially grossified thought, you can say. If you have a thought coming from lack, then you're creating a world which is bound to have problems, because it's created from a place of lack. If you create a world that is from a place of fullness, it is not going to have as many problems as a world that's created from lack. Which is why, if you are happy, you tend to create things which are beneficial to the world. If you're miserable, you tend to create things which are like, which cause misery to other people. Like that's like from our own experience. And when I say create, I'm just talking about the thoughts that you are even bringing to this world. If you're a miserable person, if you have a lot of problems in your own mind, you're going to create misery around the world. That's just how the nature of how this works. So the power of Maya is just projection. Whatever is the sort of memories and ideas and desires that we have, those are the ones that get projected and grossified into this world. When self-realization dawns, all of the desires, all of like the deeply rooted, like compulsive things that we really want to do, they disappear. And then what remains is just Brahman. And from that place, what desires come up is not from a compulsive standpoint. It's like natural, and it may be what is needed around you, and which is why those desires are essentially pursued. Any thoughts about this one?
Hi, Puneet. I have so many questions actually listening to this.
Sure.
But I don't want to take up time. I know. I don't know if it's good to ask now or wait till.
No, you can ask now. Let's do it.
So the first question was, in my mind, or from what I thought I learned, was Maya was the illusion of the mind. I think similar to what you had said earlier, that a lot of people think that it's not true. I'm sorry, there's someone cutting the lawn. If you can.
No, that's fine. I can't hear it.
Okay. So that was the first question. Like for me, I thought it was the quality of my mind that was creating or projecting to the world which was an illusion. So I assumed that was just my false self. Like I didn't realize that was also in Brahman. That was the first question. Second question was, when we say double aspect of projection, I understood, but what is the aspect of concealment in Maya?
Yeah. Okay, I'll answer the second question first, which is concealment. So the reason we don't know who we are is the concealment aspect. Like, let's say you have a question of like, if we are the self, if everyone is already the self, right? Which is a fact, everyone is the self. Why is it that nobody knows it? So a doubt that many of us have, which is like, why don't I know myself? Like, why isn't it obvious? And that's because of Maya. And that's the sort of reason we use, that there is this great power that is moving us in a direction. There's essentially two powers. One is, the power of dharma, which is what is our true purpose in life. We are all moving towards self-realization. That's the dharma of a human being. Everyone is. The problem is how fast we move or how slow we move depends on how much of unfulfilled desires we have. And why do those desires exist? We say it's because of Maya, because these desires conceal our true nature. They put our energies in a place where it's not moving us in the direction of realization, right? Like, let's say we get addicted to drugs. Let's say we kind of like gamble our savings away and like go into like, a crazy place where we have no time to do any of this practice. Let's say we are in a place where there's a war happening. All you're doing is like, surviving. There's no time to do yoga, right? Like, so all of these things exist. It's a fact for people. So we explain that and say that's Maya, because of the great power of Maya, that all of this is happening. And we can, in the end, we can even use all of those bad experiences to move in the direction of the self. We can. It's definitely possible, but it's obviously much harder. People who are in states of hell and people who are in states of heaven, it's very hard for them to do yoga. But people who are in the state of the earth, which is like the world where you have some fun in life and you have some pain in life, you have more of a possibility to do yoga. So that's the concealment aspect. And then your first question was about, you thought that the mind is something that comes out. No, Maya is something that comes out of the mind, if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, I was under the impression that the quality of my mind was projecting to the world, which was an illusion,
Yes.
which is Maya. But I
Correct.
didn't realize Maya was in Brahman.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, even after realization, we are still going to be projecting ideas, and Maya is still you're still going to be participating in this world, right? So that doesn't stop either. So the power of Maya is going to continue. It's just that for you individually, from a subjective standpoint, the effect of it is gone. But on somebody else, the effect of Maya may still exist. So, a good example is, let's say you're with a group of friends and, the stock market crashes by 50%, and you may be fine, but like everyone around you is like, going crazy maybe, right? So the effect of Maya is still continuing, which is people around you are getting affected by it. But from a subjective standpoint, Maya is not affecting you. You may still experience it. You may still see that the stock market has gone down, but that's also Maya, which is that, the idea of like all the experiences that you're seeing, experiences of like your friends. Does that make sense? So Maya is something that is in Brahman. Whenever there's creation that's happening, it's because of Maya, is how we explain it in the Vedanta. And in creation can be positive or negative. You can create a beautiful piece of music, but that's also, you can say, the power of Maya. It just so happens that it is not something that damages anybody, right? If I create a missile, it's also Maya, cause of Maya, because it all comes from a root of expression, right? I'm creating a missile because I think I'm expressing my ability or like whatever, like my intelligence that I have. But the form is that it is a destructive device. But I can do the same thing with something that is more constructive, which is I can create a beautiful painting or a beautiful, piece of music. All of those are also acts of creation. and I'm projecting. I'm essentially creating it in the world. So it is a projection in that sense. Does that make sense? So the Maya exists all the time. It's just that does it have the effect to draw you in and confuse you? And for this person in ignorance, it does. They are getting drawn in all the time. But for a person of knowledge, Maya has no effect.
Yes, yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I had a different understanding of Maya, and just from hearing what you were saying, it like clicked for me. It felt like, you know, the Buddhist saying form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So I think now, from just hearing everything you said, Maya is not just something just my mind creates. It's just creation in general of the form in this world, which is also in Brahman, right? Yeah, okay, I got it. Thank you so much.
I like what Vivekananda says about Maya. He says Maya is a fact, right? Like it is a fact that it's a great power. It has a fact. I mean, it is a fact that it is a great power, and it can lead to us doing all sorts of crazy things. And he uses a bunch of different examples. Like he uses examples of people addicted to money, people addicted to gambling, and they know that it is wrong, but yet we cannot help ourselves because, you know, that's the power, the great power of Maya. Another example he uses is like, you know, a son who's a brute, who, like, you know, doesn't take care of their mother at all, you know, like abuses the mother, like, you know, treats her like horribly, but the mother cannot help herself and love the son, no matter what the son does, right? And that's also Maya, because that's just the power, like you just cannot help yourself. So, and it's very hard to get out of it, especially for people who are in the realms of hell and heaven. But people who have some space in their life, they are the only ones who are, you know, that's why they say the human birth is one of the, you know, chances for us to get out of Maya. If you're an animal, or if you're like, you don't have the mind or the capacity to have that space and to be able to reflect, it is impossible. If that makes sense.
Puneet, what do you mean by in hell or heaven?
Okay.
What's the reference there?
Oh yeah, so I guess, you know, the previous example of if you're in hell, it's like maybe you're in a war, you know, war zone. Maybe you're destitute, you have no money to even like feed yourself or like your
heaven
family.
and
All
hell,
you're thinking is
heaven or hell in this world, in this experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, not some.
Gotcha. All right.
Not a different world. Correct.
Thanks.
If you're Donald Trump, for example, you may be in heaven because you have all of the resources, but still no, still no thought about doing any yoga because you don't think that's necessary. Right. So you can live an opulent world where, like, why do I need to do yoga? Everything is amazing, right? Like I am in heaven.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks.
So that's the opposite, which is the opposite side of things. Okay, sorry, we went quite over and we didn't get to a meditation. So let's do a quick 10-minute meditation, if that's okay. We will be running 5 minutes over. All right, let's start by sitting in a comfortable position. Start by taking a few deep breaths. You want to notice the air going into your lungs, noticing the sensations that are expanding your lungs, and exhaling, noticing the compression of your lungs. You want to settle into your body. Notice if you're strained You're feeling a little tension while you're breathing. Breathe into that place where there's a bit of tension. Let a couple more times. By doing this breathing, we just start to notice that we are always a witness to what's going on. Immediately lands us in that place of being a witness to our sensations, our breath. It's like we are a blank canvas. And in that canvas, we are painting sensations of the breath coming in, maybe the sounds of birds around you. And this canvas, images of objects keep coming, keep changing. But this canvas of awareness is always there. We want to get rooted in this experience of noticing the canvas. This canvas is always available. With our eyes closed, canvas appears different, where there are no sensory inputs like the images from your eyes, but the canvas exists nonetheless. So with your eyes closed, you can notice the different sounds and sensations, maybe thoughts that you're thinking. Appear in this canvas. This canvas extends infinitely, you can say. Where is the boundary of this canvas? You can have a thought that's very close to you. You can have a thought that's very far away. You can imagine a planet in some remote part of the galaxy. In this canvas, it has appeared. On the contrary, you can imagine a tiny atom that's very close to you. This canvas pervades everything, you can say. In this canvas is your experience of this world, both within the inner world and when you go out. So when you open your eyes and walk around, this canvas is on, and your senses are painting it and filling it with whatever is being experienced. let us end this meditation with our ending chant. Yogarato va, bhogarato va, sangarato va, sangavihina, yasya brahmani ramate chittam, nandeti nandeti nandatyeva, nandeti nandeti nandatyeva. So I love this verse because it encompasses the entire purpose of this work, which is to be free and essentially revel and enjoy this world, no matter the situation, whether you're in hell or in heaven. So I hope this is a possibility for all of us, and keep up the practice. There's 6 different methods that were prescribed in this in the last few verses. See which one is something that fits for you. You know, make sure you have a toolkit. You have a yoga toolkit that you can use in any situation. So if you're feeling that your mind is more quiet, use something that's grosser and more suitable. If your mind is quiet and subtle, drop that sort of method and move to a more subtler practice. Keep playing with it. Once you get a little bit more familiar, you will know exactly what to use, when to use them. And yeah, keep practicing and get rooted. The goal is to get rooted, where even if the Buddha comes up to you and says you are not enlightened, you can only laugh at him. That is the goal. Okay, I'll stop here in terms of this class. I can hang out for like another few minutes if anyone has questions. Okay, I will stop recording.